It's a bold claim. The economies of games have always been suspect at best. There are just so many moving parts, and it's often very easy for players to just become obscenely wealthy, either through exploiting poorly designed game systems or simply by just playing the game. In particular, D&D's economy is nearly universally seen as a joke. The average unskilled labourer earns 2 silver pieces a day, which is the cost of a gallon of ale, and also matches up 2 silver exactly with the cost of living with a poor lifestyle. This is all while a chicken costs 2 copper pieces, which is a tenth of an unskilled labourer's daily wage, making chicken farming probably the best side gig for any unskilled labourer in a D&D world. You'd be mad if you didn't own an awful lot of chickens and sustain yourself largely using eggs. But these aren't even the biggest issues with how financial systems work in D&D. This is a world where each slain dragon represents a massive cash injection into a local economic system, and a world in which the mercenary adventurer class is a potential wealth generation machine, while somehow prices stay exactly the same for the rest of the world. And everyone uses the same gold-based currency? This is without mentioning that magic itself often requires material costs, while also being completely capable of shortcutting labour and or just printing money. Today, I'm not going to offer a coherent economic theory of Dungeons & Dragons. That is far beyond the scope of a video of this size. But I am going to discuss some of the biggest critiques D&D's economy falls under, and explain why I believe these critiques might not apply, based purely on the implied mechanics of the game itself. And first, we're going to discuss the universality of value. Although the official advice to Dungeon Masters has always been to treat the gold piece as a broad, hand-waved truth in the world for convenience's sake, simply because multiple interconnected different national versions of currency make the administration of this game far more complicated than necessary, I would actually suggest that a near-universal copper, silver, electrum, gold and platinum scale of valuable coins, a currency based on the value of these metals, is among the only reasonable ways to set up an economy when you're dealing with as much magic as Dungeons & Dragons has. The main risks of using a quantity of a valuable thing as its own direct monetary value are: 1, it creates a need for every vendor to be able to determine the value, weight, composition and provenance of each coin to protect against criminal activity like coin clipping or passing off cheaper metals as, say, gold. 2, there comes a point when any given transaction is either too large or too small to use these physical valuable resources of gold or copper or anything like that, which also comes with the risk of losing some of your assets like gold bars or something to crime, if transport is actually needed for all your wealth to make a large-scale transaction in the flesh. And 3, relying on a coins as value system means that a government or organisational body has no way to drastically alter the available value of money in circulation, leading to weaker fiscal control. Weirdly, point 2 is actually the hardest one to solve. But there is a quick fix for low-value transactions. High-value transactions have their own solution, which actually I believe is inbuilt to Dungeons & Dragons worlds, which we're going to discuss in a little bit. First, I do need to say that on a day-to-day basis, especially in a semi-feudal economy like D&D likes to pretend it has, most transactions among most people, i.e. peasants and serfs, don't involve coinage at all, but actually rely on the far more ancient barter system. If we go by that average income for an unskilled labourer, the 2 silver pieces a day, and the average cost of supporting a lifestyle as a poor person, 2 silver pieces a day, it becomes fairly clear that we're dealing with a system of indentured work with no disposable income to speak of, potentially. For the moderately wealthy, though, precious metals made into coins that have the value of those metals makes some sense. as long as these coins can be authenticated. And it turns out in D&D, authentication is actually quite easy. Identify is a first level spell, and Mage Hand is a cantrip. With just these two spells, we can establish both provenance and legitimate value of any coin that is minted by an established authority in a D&D world. And if you want to make sure a coin has its stated value, is made of the composite materials that it claims to be made of, you just need Mage Hand. And by the way, cantrips in general, Mage Hand generally, it's much easier to get your hands on in D&D's 2024 version than it has ever been before. Now, I'm not expecting every shopkeeper to be a spellcaster, but for merchants with some affiliation with trade or guild organisations, it should be fairly commonplace to hire a low-level mage as an authenticator, mediator, and conveyancer for large-scale dealings. For all other deals, you'd likely rely on makers or minters marks on coins, because these would definitely exist based on how D&D coins are likely made, which again, we'll be discussing in a second. So how do the spells Mage Hand and Identify solve forgery as a problem together? First, Mage Hand has a little hidden power that's arguably more useful than its role as a floating hand that can move within 30 feet of you. Mage Hand vanishes instantly if it is holding on to more than 15 pounds worth of weight. Therefore, with careful manipulation using specific weights, you can tailor a situation where the exact correct quantity of the metal you're looking for at the correct weight in the correct volume of coinage can be supported by the Mage Hand, and nothing more and nothing less. You do a calculation, add enough weight, then add the purported gold on top. If the hand doesn't disappear, you add a tiny little bit of weight, and then it does disappear. If it's gold. Now, if the hand doesn't disappear where you add the extra weight, then the gold is not the right weight, or if it disappears before you've added all of the gold, as calculated for real gold, in its weight at least, then the hand's disappeared early, and said gold is mixed with a more heavy metal, should we say. So you can test both sides, heavy or light. But hang on. Accurate weights and measures didn't exist in our world until at least the 19th century. See, that's the thing. I believe Mage Hand, as existing in D&D, creates a universal constant for weights in small quantities. We, as players of the game or readers of the spell, know that it can hold up to 15 pounds of stuff. People of a D&D world may not use pounds, but they may instead refer to that weight as a mage's handful. 7.5 pounds becomes a half hand, 3.25 pounds a quarter hand, and so on. And with Mage Hand's limit as the universal constant, a weight measurement system can be much more effective and feel more efficient than just dividing 15 into multiple parts. Let's say a mage's handful is worth 1,000 units, and you get a far more divisible and delineatable system of measurements where tiny adjustments can be made to a hand's load to adjust for precise weight changes. And weights can be measured against themselves against a universal constant, meaning that dud weights won't happen. But even if we can perfectly test the weights on our Mage Hand using known weights and known quantities, and then use said weights to measure other quantities and other weights against themselves, how do we manufacture all of these perfect weights? Fabricate. Fabricate, the spell, is a merchant's best friend. It allows for the conversion of raw materials into objects with a degree of uniformity only accessible through using proper machinery. This would be used to make the weights for Mage Hand weighing sessions, but also to make the coins themselves. See, Fabricate actually leaves a tiny magical signature, as well as allowing a skilled fabrication mage to have their own personal maker's mark on each product that they create. Just for accountability purposes, really, and to see where the money's coming from. The magical signature that I'm talking about, by the way, is the coins having been created by a spell. This is where Identify comes in. Identify can discern any specific spell acting upon any object that is touched. Sure. But it can also identify any spell used in the creation of said object. In other words, Identify can tell if you've, say, enlarged a miniaturized coin into a big one and are trying to pass it off as the full value, or if you've created an illusion to make coppers look more valuable. But crucially, Identify can confirm to anyone if a particular object was made using the Fabricate spell. Detect magic would also work, although less well, to detect the transmutation magic left over that Fabricate is a part of, in large quantities of objects, so you don't have to specifically identify each individual coin. It's a broader blanket solution, but there is more chance of something slipping through the cracks with Detect Magic. So, we now have a system of variegated rare metal coins created by high-level fabrication mages, who will need to have some sort of governmental or institutional oversight. And these fabrication mages are likely to be affiliated with various mining and trade operations, and they will be asked every so often to transform raw ore into coins, with their specific fabricator's maker's mark as a stamp of authority. New coins which can then be put into circulation as and when the powers that be deem it necessary. Suddenly, we have uniform coins with magically machined precision which are traceable to a single qualified creator, a creator who has a work order, and so are liable to be managed by governments and nations, with the added benefit that these coins can be minted near instantly as long as one has a decent supply of the materials to create said coins. So, if a major deadline is coming up on a kingdom's payment, they can transform things into coins and do it that way. Equally, you could do the same with gold bars or anything like that. A sufficient quantity of gold itself, in various forms, can be liquidated and turned into solid bars, for instance. But hold on, that doesn't solve the problem of transactions that are too big to use physical money. Because nobody wants to cart either truckloads of coins around or specifically minted bars around. It's too dangerous and bulky and heavy. You could here suggest some sort of promissory note or contract value agreed in theory, or a series of banks or a complex system of debts. This would likely, in the long term, transform and modernise the economy into a fiat-based one in just a few generations even. Leaving coins as a relic, because carrying around 100 coins to pay for 2 basic health potions, it is a bit ludicrous. Now this would be the case if it weren't for Identify and, weirdly, Resurrection. And this also brings us on to one of the biggest things from any economic system that D&D often just ignores: inflation. D&D's economic system is unique among any in our world's history because the prices have been fixed for hundreds of thousands of years. Frankly, as long as magic has existed. Identify, in its casting, requires the user to be in possession of a pearl worth over 100 gold pieces. This pearl, by the way, is not consumed. It is likely that as a graduate member of the Guild of Weights and Authenticity, a person may be given an enspelled staff containing up to 5 daily casts of Identify, a staff which is adorned with a beautiful pearl worth just over 100 gold pieces. Such a staff, as I just described, by the way, would be craftable by any low-level mage with any proficiency in woodworking for a cost of 150 gold pieces, including the 100 gold pearl. It's very likely that this staff would serve as some sort of badge of office of a guild of weights and measures, or whatever you want to do, and as a helpful tool to allow them to cast a very useful spell 5 times in a day, potentially. Perhaps more significantly, though, to cast Resurrection, magic which can literally bring someone back from the dead, as long as they've died some point within the last 100 years, there is a consumable cost of a diamond worth more than 1,000 gold pieces. In short, the spell components of Identify, of Resurrection, and all sorts of spells of that nature represent a fixed, universal, constant cost for a specific good or service, and also represent materials that have clear and demonstrable worth universally around an economy. Materials, by the way, which are quite expensive, quite light, and would serve as tools for transaction in the higher scales of spending. It's not even ridiculous to stockpile multiple diamonds worth more than 1,000 gold pieces, because you need 25,000 gold worth of diamonds to cast true resurrection, restoring a creature from any ailment or any type of death except old age, within 200 years. But there is a problem with this diamond-based finance system, and you've probably already spotted it. Who decides what a diamond is worth? Surely, if you're absolutely desperate to revive someone, it is best practice to go to any seller of a diamond and buy whatever they can, whatever you can, their worst stock, something that doesn't have to be particularly special, for 1,000 gold pieces. Or 25,000 gold pieces if you need a true resurrection, thereby rendering that diamond that you've bought, even the crappiest one from a jeweller, worth that value. Equally, if you bought a diamond for 1,000 gold 75 years ago, is it now worth more due to inflation? Does the magic understand and adjudicate supply and demand and broader market forces? You could certainly try and run spellcasting that way, as spells understanding broad inflationary trends, or the magic is programmed or keyed to a certain type, quality, or purity of diamond. And the value of that kind of diamond equals the value of casting the associated spell. If the actual physical cost of casting a spell is constant, and the highest units of currency are essentially tokens for casting those spells, then that eliminates a major factor in inflation in most systems: the cost of materials and services. Plus, it sets an expectation that a specific type of gem is the cost to get someone revived, added on to whatever fee the mage takes for casting said spell. And if inflation were to instead cause the cost of spell casting itself to rise drastically year on year, then I'd wager the diamond sellers would have something to say about that. At this point, either the entire economy just ups its costs for everything and follows inflation driven by the demands of the working people, like mages or general labourers or whatever market forces might be causing inflation, at which point any purveyor of any material cost for any spell is significantly hard done by, because those costs are keyed into the spells themselves, meaning that eventually diamonds worthy of casting Revivify through will be worth pennies. Or the diamond barons or monarchs, nations, guilds or trade unions band together to ensure that the ambitions of labourers are kept in check, ensuring that diamond, gold and pearls become standard units of currency. Indeed, the standard units of currency around which the rest of the economy of a D&D world is moored. Maybe even subsidising mining operations in low yield years to ensure that the costs of Revivify and Revival and Resurrection remain constant. Because it's actually in the vested interests of everyone in power to keep resurrection components valuable in comparison to the costs of services and labour. Because these resurrection components themselves act as valuable stores of money to pay for said services. If a resurrection spell requires a diamond worth 1,000 gold and you're paying a mage 3 diamonds worth 1,000 gold, something's gone horribly wrong. Basically, I would argue that a magically fixed limit on the actual practical value of an object throughout the history of a spell's existence strongly incentivizes not just an economy built around these stable objects that will always have a function in spellcasting, because people are always dying untimely deaths and it's just useful to have the tools to bring them back, but it also incentivizes the powers that be to adopt the currency as value monetary system to keep those costs of spells and the casting of said spells, the material costs of spells, the same year on year, partly because it keeps resurrections for the rare and gifted few. And if we are operating under the semi-feudal looking system that D&D often presumes those pesky mages that are demanding more money for their labour may well be under the thumb of a more traditional authority anyway, which means that the pricing expectations of labour that underpin the whole economic system may be far easier to centralise and generally ignore. It may even be that there is actually no cost to pay a spellcaster, that is, if the mage is already part of your court, an indentured servant of a monarch, let's say. So there we have it. D&D's economy is one which relies on the inherent value of materials, modified into uniform and traceable coins, which can be verified and identified using basic magic, in denominations ranging from 1 copper piece to a diamond worth 1,000 gold pieces. And this is an economy wherein the fixed universal prices make some degree of sense, in an attempt by all of those who are in power to collectively maintain the intrinsic value of a resurrection or an identify spell, a task which unites almost all of the rich and powerful people in the world. So, is D&D's economy fixed? I mean, in a sense, the whole thing is one whole fixed cost system, forever, potentially, as long as nobody decides to upset that status quo. Did I fix D&D's economy? Not really. There are a lot of problems that I haven't addressed in this video, and I certainly haven't got a universal economic system that justifies every choice made by D&D's designers. I don't. That's possibly impossible. I've just justified why some of the decisions made by said designers might actually make a lot more sense than you might think. But that's all we have time for today. Please do let me know your thoughts on this in the comments, especially if you have any background in actual economics. I understand I've been taking a very step back look at all of this. I am in no way an economist. I'm certainly not within my field of expertise, but I just thought this would be interesting enough for people to run with or tear apart. Please do feel free if you have some specific knowledge. Other than that, though, all that's left to say is that I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.